Hello? Enggak.
Done speaking.
Good morning.
Sir, very good morning, sir.
Good morning, Madhu.
Yes, sir.
Good morning and welcome to all on one day national. Good morning and welcome to all one day national level seminar on changing scenario of economic development during pandemic, organized by RTES Societies Arts, Science and Commerce, jointly organized Department of Commerce and IQSC. So next I would like to invite RTS Society's Chairman SV Saukar sir and our Principal Fetch Machanelli sir and our HOD Swapnadi Mudugal and all delegates to inaugurate this webinar. Come on, sir. Thank you, sir and madam. Next, I would like to invite our HOD Swapna D. Mudugal to give a welcome speech.
Very good morning, sir. Welcome to all participants to webinar organized by the Department of Commerce. In the pandemic situation, how it would be affecting the economic development. It's a great opportunity to me to organize a webinar. Once again, I would like to welcome all the participants to the program. Next, I would like to hand over.
Thank you, madam. Next, I would like to invite Praveen N.A., Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to give a resource person's introduction.
Yes, good morning and welcome to all the participants and delegates of this webinar. I'm now going to give an introduction of this webinar resource person, Professor Manas Pandey sir, ex-head Department of Business Economics, former Dean, Faculty of Management Studies, Chairman, Pandit Deenadayal Upadhyay Shodhapita, Coordinator, RUSA and IQAC, VBS Purvanchal University, Jonapur, Uttar Pradesh. Scholarships and award of Professor Manas Pandey sir, UGC National Merit Scholarship, Government of India National Scholarship awarded, Indian Commerce Best Business Academic of the year 2008, Association in 2009, Best Teacher Award in Lions Club in 2016, and M. Parasmulla Choradia Dronacharya Award 2018 for lifetime achievement by Rajasthan Youth Association and Educational and Public Service Trust, Bangalore. And Professor Manas Pandey sir is chief editor of the journal Business Vision, published solely in since 2005. And Professor Manas Pandey sir, PhD research guidance is 7 awarded and 5 have been enrolled. Thank you for giving the opportunity to introduce the resource person. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Praveen sir. The next session will be hand over to Manas Pandey sir. Hand over, sir. The session is going to conducted by resource person Professor Manas Pandey sir. The session is yours, sir. You can proceed. Sir, mute ತೆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ.
Sir, Manas Pandey sir,
Sir, please unmute.
unmute your mic. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
To all of you for giving me an opportunity, and thank you to the RTS College manager, sir. Thank you to the Dr. Sapna, Head Department of Commerce. Thank you to Madhu, the coordinator IQAC. And it is my privilege to be the part of your college as an active member. And today I am once again with you on the seminar on the changing scenario of economic development during the pandemic. When we talk about the economic development, there is need to understand why we talk about the changing scenario. If we go through the past, the history started with the Chanakya's economic concept, where he has given a concept related to the land reform as well as the how to administer. Then in the Mughal Kal, there is a changes in the again system of economic development, and land reform is one of the part, but they have introduced the taxation policy also. And after that, there are number of changes has been taken place, but in 19th century, Dadaji Bhai Naroji and Mahadev Ranade and Ramesh Chandra has given the concept of the poverty. And Dadaji Bhai Naroji about the concept of the poverty, as well as the problem faced by the Indian peoples during the regime of the English people. So all these are the part where he has analyzed first time the national income also. Dadaji Bhai Naroji has analyzed the national income also first time in the 19th century. Then V.K.R.V. Rao has developed the concept of the national income in detail with the complete set of data in the earlier 20th century. At that same time, there are a number of social economists who also developed the concept of the social economics. So, after independence, India is in the developing stage, and they started developing the economy by making the planning commission. The first planning commission related to the agriculture, second one was the industries, and so on. So there are two concepts of the development of economy. One is that we try to develop sector wise, and second is we focus on all the sectors at the same time. So for that very purpose, it becomes an important issue that initially India was trying to develop sector wise, and then in 1991, after the introduction of the LPG era, the economy is open, and that causes changes in the entire demand and supply systems of the economy. Then 2008 recession was the Great Recession, global recession, where India was affected, but it was not affected as the Western countries affected. So this 2008 crisis anyhow given an impact that if you have the combination of the saving and investments, then you will be survive. Otherwise, there is no chance at all. So for that very purpose, it becomes an important issue that how you are going to develop yourself. So these are the some brief points which I would like to convey you, because before discussing anything related to the economic development during the pandemics, you need to understand that economy was facing the recession since 2008, and the 2008 onwards, then the present government has also introduced some Skill India, Startup India's program, and given some motivation to the GST and demonetizations also, so that the economy can improve. But it is not well developed as it is required. So economy across the world plunged into the deep contraction in the April-June quarter 2022. And for India, the fall in real GDP in the quarter was recorded lowest by 23.9%, with the RBI calling it historical technical recession. And the contraction continued in the second quarter, minus 7.5%. And then if this technical resistance recession persists in the third quarter of the fiscal year, it could turn into a full-fledged recession. But the force since independence, first in liberalization time and possibly the worst one. So even before the pandemic, the economy was already slowing down, the deficiency evident in both consumption and investment demand. Unlike some other countries, consumption and investment has been main driver of growth in India in recent times. Though export contributed in earlier version of the India's growth story, in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, its efficacy to the boost growth need to the closely observed. Despite repeated attempts to bolster manufacturing, the sector failed to grow, leaving services to step up. Eventually, lack of demand hit all segments irrespective of their economic nature. The pandemic, as an external shock, has finally contracted the economy. It is a widely held view that every crisis also presents an opportunity. Given the prevalence of inequality in Indian economy, the implementation of a fiscal stimulus across sectors will not only lift the economy, but of the course, but also address some of the existing distortions in the income and wealth distribution. The growth tends in broad macroeconomic fundamental of the Indian economy since 2012-13 means 2008 the global crisis, and then 2012-13, if you are going to analyze all these things, bring out the issues around the aggregate demand in the last few years, and the nature of the downturn that was observed before the pandemic. The basic contention was whether it was cyclical or structural. The pandemic and the ensuing economic crisis render these debates redundant, at least in the short run, as both consumption and investment demand crashed for anybody. This is the long-standing structural issues and bottleneck plaguing the economy. Rather, it's concentrate on immediate demand recovery, thereby a return to the normalcy in the economy. Okay. Now, there are certain features which you have to know before going to the pandemic situations, that in the first quarter of the 2021, I am talking about the January, April, May, June 20, GDP at constant price contracted by 23.9%, while GVA, gross value added, at constant price contracted by 22.8%. And the quarter coincided with the nationwide lockdown to arrest the spread. Now the lockdown is implemented to spread the COVID-19, and beginning at the end of the March and ending in June, early June, even as the contraction was largely expected. However, the nearly 24% fall in GDP still came as a shock to many. Now, it is also criticized by the number of persons that it is 24%. But when there is total lockdown, there is no production, no consumption, no demand is there, then obviously there is no question of any production. And when there is no production, there is a drop of the GDP. It is a common issue. But in economic sense, it was criticized by the various economists also that the GDP was fall up to the level of 24%. The COVID-19 pandemic is an external shock for India. However, the downward started even before the pandemic caused a massive economic fallout. The trend lies, if you see, then you will find it out that it is since quarter one, well, the first quarter of the 2018-19, the GDP rate changes and has been sliding down frequently. And the last quarter of the 1990 to 2019 and 20 show a growth rate of 3.1%, which is less than the 4.3% of the last quarter of the 2012-13. So if you are going to analyze the situations in the last 7 years, the structural paradigm held that the slowdown is a continuation of the 2012-13 crisis, with the lack of adequate structural administrative reforms resulting in a repeat of the same crisis. The former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan had also underlined the structural constant like labor and land restrictions and governance issues. Another view linked the lack of consumer demand with the absence of inclusive growth and resultant income inequality. Whenever the income of the top earners of the economy suffers, domestic demand falters, and the rest of the earners' incomes are low and thus unable to prop up domestic demand in a significant manner. So, initially, internal policy mismanagement has also been pointed out by the some of the reason for the downturn. Nobel laureates like Abhijit Banerjee has said that demonetization and implementation of GST were plausible cause of the slowdown. Other economists have also drawn attention to the agricultural distress. Such state of affair has been a result of India's failure to create higher productivity in agriculture and simultaneously inability to create higher productivity jobs in industries that could absorb surplus agricultural labor. This resulted in a fall in the consumption demand in rural India. Now, further, a higher interest rate is originating from the inflation targeting policy of the RBI has been periodically blamed, and increasing trust deficit among the investors and the economic agent in the system about the institution and the government have been mentioned that the Indian economy has been weighed down by a combination of a structural and cyclical factors. So the pandemic has since made the structural versus cyclical debate largely redundant, at least in the short run. Around 60% of the global economy, which included 90% of the advanced economy, 97% of the, have cut policy interest below 1%. And it is suggested by the IMF also that implies that the world economy is now under a global liquidity trap. For all countries, boosting demand and climbing up back to the normalcy can only be done through the fiscal manner. So, when we talk about anything related to the economy, national income or output GDP. GDP consists of the private consumption, government consumption, investment, and net export. Given the difference between the export and import, export means difference between the export and import. So the national uh, income identity provides the level of aggregate demand existing in the When aggregate supply meets the aggregate demand, the economy is generally said to be in an equilibrium. If the aggregate demand does not match the level of aggregate supply, then output adjusts in the next time period to match the level of aggregate demand. In other words, if current level of the aggregate demand is inadequate to buy all goods and services produced in the economy, then producer will cut back their output to match the existing level of aggregate demand. The basic point is essentially there is an empirical evidences of lack of aggregate demand in the current Indian economy. Then the only way through a via fiscal policy intervention we have seen in various points of the economy history of troubled economies. The last instance being in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. Consumption termed as private consumption termed as private uh, fini- pri- private uh, final consumption expenditure, which is known as the PFCF, is the first of the most important component of the aggregate demand. And a declining trend for quarterly growth of the component of quarter one of the 2020-21 consumption growth rate has slumped by 26.7% compared to the same quarter in the previous year. Excluding growth rate of quarter one of the 2021, that long-term trend in consumption growth has stagnated in the last few years and has fallen to the 2.7% in the last quarter of the 2019 and 20. At the same time, after consumption, investment, termed as the gross fixed capital formation, GFCEF, and a gross fixed capital formation is the other important component of aggregate demand. The pandemic has sent investment uh, growth crashing by 47.1%. In the first quarter of the 2021, the average trend value has stagnated by around 5% in the last 7 years. Last 7 years. And government final consumption expenditure in the next component of the aggregate demand, trend line of the quarterly growth rate of G is increasing for the last 8 years, continuing to do so in the first quarter. This is one of the components that has enabled the overall quarterly GDP growth rate to be in the positive zone in the last 2 years or so. But the share of government expenditure in total GDP, despite continuous rise in growth, has been 18.1% in the first quarter of the 2020-21. It has reached its limit and its component alone can no longer prop up the overall GDP. And the next part is net export, means export minus import. The difference between the export and import is most important demand component of the GDP. The last 2 years, trade tensions and turmoil in international trade, the export growth was expected to decrease and export growth slumped by 19.8% in the first quarter of the 2021. But even before the growth rate were negative in previous 3 quarters, imports were going down before the pandemic. And the trend continues after. There may be a general perception that decreasing imports are good for an economy. It is not so for the Indian economy. Apart from crude oil imports, the India imports sizable amount of capital goods, mainly heavy machinery, equipment that are not produced in India. Indian manufacturing and other industries are crucially dependent on these capital goods. There has been no empirical evidences of large-scale import substitution strategy in these capital goods in recent times. So, unless import dependence is decisively diminishing for these goods, the trend line going down does not serve Indian industries well. The manufacturing is going down, obviously. Therefore, given the current composition and structure of the Indian production, net exports, getting into positive values, getting into positive values does not bode well for the economy. It implies lack of demand and diminishing activities in manufacturing and allied services. For any developing country need to be threshold warranted import growth to maintain sustainable output expansion, particularly in manufacturing. India is no exception. A certain amount of import in India capital good is necessary to reboot. In that sense, import going down and trade surplus going up right now cannot be treated as a good indications. Subdued tendency in international trade will linger in the immediate future, making rapid growth in the export difficult, at least in the immediate short. Why? It will be good if export pick up eventually in a couple of years. Banking on export to revive the economy may not be a safe option. As a more direct and safer intervention, domestic demand can be boosted immediately to revive the economy. And the parameter to look out for will be import of oil and capital goods. If these parameters shows an uptick soon, it will indicate a rebound in manufacturing and heavy industry. Among the components of aggregate demand generator, consumption and investments are two largest contributors. Consumption and investments are the two largest contributors. And in the first quarter of the 2019 and 20, these two contributed 88.4% in the total GDP. And in quarter one of the, after 1 year, in 2021, contributed only 76.6%. If the share of these demand component in the new series of GDP are observed, then it becomes clear that the consumption mainly drives the economy, followed by the investment. Now, consumption and investment demand at close to the 80% of the GDP are two most important contributors of the GDP. No revival can take place if these two remain subdued or keep falling. As so for making your economy maintaining, if you are interested to maintain your economy, for that very purpose, the consumption and investment should be maintained. As pointed out that the net export as a demand driver currently is in an uncertain zone. Though government expenditures shows steadily rising growth rates, it has contributed 18.1%. Its contribution was 11.8% in the same quarter in the previous year. So government is forcing while the consumption and investment is reducing, the government is trying to revive the economy by contributing much on the in the as a form of government expenditure, and for that's why the government contributed 18.1%. So government consumption on its own cannot revive the economy from its current contractionary phases. So for that very purpose, there are some important sectors of the economy which needed to be evaluated. Number one is agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Is the only sector which shows the positive growth rate. This is a good development for the economy. But revival cannot be agriculture based under the current circumstances. And as we know, we are knowing as a, that India is an agriculture, 70% population living in the rural areas. But still we have not given an authorities to the rural areas people to participate in the administration, to participate in the decision making process. So this is one of the important issues when we are talking about that the 70% population living in the rural areas, we should give them the proper right to be the part of the decision making and policy making in the country level. Then the second one is the financial and real estate and professional services are relatively less badly affected because all these are the service sectors part and should recover in reasonable times. But the recovery will be dependent on the industrial and consumers demand recovery. And the same is true in the contraction and construction and the internal trade, tourism, transport, communication sector also. Though the construction shows sign of rebound, tourism is likely to suffer the most. That may eclipse some possible gain in the communication during the pandemic. However, till the detailed sectoral data are available, overall revival of the bucket of some important large sectors of the economy will be dependent on the real sector activities and how these sectors cope up with the periodic disruption due to the pandemic. Hmm. Then electricity, water, gas, and public utility services, public administration, defense, and other services are likely to get back to the normalcy sooner than other sectors. But these cannot be propel economy into the desired growth path alone. And once long-term stability in these sectors will depend upon overall revival. So in these during pandemic period, the government also announces 20 lakhs crore India's fiscal stimulus package, which is also did not given much more effective and fiscal firepower to boost the demand. It was evident from the different estimates of the actual fiscal cost of the central exchequers calculated by the various banks and brokerages and rating agencies. So it is important for you people to know that in any recessionary situations, money needed to be directly pumped, primed into the system, mainly to boost the immediate consumption and investment. Boosting immediate consumption, immediate economic consumption and investments uh, in the economic activities by investing public capital enhances the purchasing power of the people of the in the economy. That purchasing power then is spent on consumption, and the consumption boosts the demand, and instantly productions are augmented to meet that extra demand, which creates more purchasing power in the economy. These cycles goes into the upper spiral and takes the economy out of the recession. That is how investment multipliers work in any economy. Monetary intervention usually have little immediate effect on the economy. Even monetary policy, the government instance of relying on increased credit supply instead of going for an all-out fiscal intervention has been quite evident. The central bank assured both the market and the government of creating comfortable liquidity conditions so that the private and the government borrowings are not hampered in any way. The following all these parameters, all these suggestions, then it is helpful to revive the activities in specific sectors for both backward and forward linkages and multiplier effect on growth. Then liquidity available by these targeted long-term repo operations can be utilized to extend the bank loans to the growth-oriented sectors. Then reacting to feedback from market participation, central bank also decided to increase the size of the special open market operation, OMO. Okay. Then to facilitate liquidity to state development loans, the RBI should conduct open market operations. Then these all ideas are increasing credit policies will facilitate economic revival, still prevailing above everything else. The pandemic induced massive GDP contraction has only accelerated the clamor. Its underlying logic is simple: making low cost loanable funds available would increase credit offtake. Those credit taken by industry or personal or any other one would then be utilized in new economic activities and finally would result in heightened revival and growth. However, if one look at the trend in the policy repo rates and the credit deposit ratio in the last 1 year, then a spectrum is bound to emerge. The slump in credit demand becomes prominent. And is incremental to the credit deposit ratio. This ratio shows how much a new deposit are extended as a large credit in the economy. And this ratio in the negative territory in the period between the July and September 2019, it slowly revived to a level of around 60% in March 2020. And the slumped thereafter to get into the negative zone once again. So deposit growth rate have been steady even during the pandemic, but there was no commensurate growth in credit. So incremental credit deposit ratios reaffirm the phenomena, shows that this trend started much before the pandemic. Okay, so some important issues prevailing which given trend from the global economy, that the global trade tension in the last 2 years and uses external shock of the COVID-19 pandemic have initiated discussions on the self-reliance Propagating a self-reliant Indian economy assume an inward-looking future global economy. That's why Make in India and Startup India and Stand Up India, all these are the concept of making yourself self-reliant. And there is a contradiction in the proposition. If every country strives to import less and export more, then internal national trade could be shrunk. That further implies a reduction of exports for all major exporting countries, and deeper introspection is required. India posted the world third highest growth rate in overall and manufacturing sectors since early 1990s. Contrary to the popular perception, India did reasonably well in high skill manufacturing sectors while it underperformed in low skilling manufacturing. The country is still in a position to gain future export opportunities, particularly in the low skilling manufacturing like cloth and footwears, and grabbing those future opportunities entail more global integrations and trade engagement. Overemphasis of the self-reliance may be inimical to that. Losing export as an important future driver of growth would be imprudent to say the least. However, uh, second and much more important point is that the omission of the Indian export trend are showing certain unusual characteristics, signifying distortion in production structure. Exploring those nuisance is beyond the scope, and the analysis is focused on immediate revival. Though demand boosters, it does not imply, however, that export is ruled out as a possible driver for future growth in the long run. So, all these discussions which I have given to you, that is related to the development of the economy during this pandemic period. What are the causes for recessions and what are the factors which have improved the economy? So, in this, in nutshell, if I am going to conclude it, if we talk about the contribution of the agriculture should be counted in the GDP, number one. The manufacturing sectors should be given much more emphasis, but we have to make more and more uh, manufacturing zones so that the pressure of the population on the particular city, particular area should be reduced. Third, we have to give a proper control over the service sectors because the service sector is contributing much more in the maximum in the GDP, but giving less employment in the GDP, less employment, as well as whereas we talk about the agriculture, it is giving less in the GDP, 18%, 17% onwards, but it gives 50% full employment. So we have to make the adjustments between providing the GDP contribution and the employment also. And the third one is that if we wanted to improve, fourth one is that if we wanted to improve the GDP trying to get the agriculture sector strengthening, we have to give much more emphasis on the logistic also, supply chain management also in the rural areas, so that the farmers may feel happy for working in the agriculture rural areas with the agriculture or allied part of the services. And at the same time, they also be very happy to be contributing much in the GDP of the any country. So, with these words, I may suggest some of my suggestions are that there is no hue and cry for any in the economy. Economy can be revived after coming over this pandemic situations, and as the demand increases, the supply may increases, and the supply and demand combinations are to get together, then it means that it will give the economy increasing trends. With these words, thank you for giving me an opportunity to say my few words on the webinar, and thank you to all the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Sapna. Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you so much, sir, for given a wonderful information about the economic scenario, changes in scenario in economic development during the pandemic situation. Thank you so much, sir. So I'd like to all participants to any queries you can ask resource person, Professor Manas Pandey, sir. If you have any doubts or any clarification about this webinar, you can ask to sir. Anybody? Feel free to ask. Okay, thank you so much, Parag. So next, I would like to invite Ramesh NG, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, to give a valedictory speech. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, all participants and delegates. Good afternoon, sir. This session is very wonderful and more informative session regarding the economic development of during the pandemic situation. Professor Manas Pandey, sir, I very much thankful, sir. Then I very much thankful to our chairman, Subhash V. Saukar, sir. I very much thankful to our college principal, F.H. Machinalli, sir. I very much thankful to webinar organizing secretary, Dr. Swapna D. Mudugal, madam. I very much thankful to webinar convener, Professor Praveen, sir. And I very much thankful to anchor and our faculty member, Mr. Birendra Amati, who have been directly and indirectly supporting for organizing this webinar. I thank each and every person. I thankful to once again all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you once again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much being a part of this webinar.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all the participants, delegate. Thank you one and all.
Subhash sir.
Yes.
Thank you, Swapna. Thank you, Madhu.
Namaste, sir. Mungu Subhash.
Namaskar.
Sir, namaste.
Namaste, 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 namaste. कैसे हो मधु?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Madhu, कैसे हो? How are you, Madhu?
Yeah, fine, sir. What about you, sir?
I'm also fine.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
You spent with your valuable time with our webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.